demo, I'm going to show you how to use layer masks to blend textures onto a face. Could be any image, and then also how to use adjustment layers. So we're going to go and I'm just going to get an image of a face. So anything will work at this point. What you want to do is make sure the image is good quality. Let it load. Like this one looks a little bit low, so I'm just going to, again, change my search options here to make sure I have just the large quality, good quality images. We get this one, and I'm just going to drop it down into Photoshop. Now you can see I have my rulers open, so at the top, this is 20 inches. That's a little bit too big. Versus it for dragging it into a new project, I'm just going to rescale it here. So I'm going to change that. You can see I have my restriction here from the lock, and I'm just going to change this to 10, and then it'll keep everything the same. In terms of proportion, and then I'm just going to change the resolution and hit OK. So now I have just a smaller file. The resolution's still good, and it looks solid. Okay, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go get some textures to play around with. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Google, and let's look up maybe like a tree bark texture. Anything you know is really going to work for this project, but something that has a texture, a tactile feel to it. And what I'm going to do is just find it, and then I'm going to drag it over and drop it onto my image, and then just rescale this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. You can use your zoom tool for that. Option click to zoom out, and I'm just going to scale it up. Now, one trick that I want to show you on this is how to make sure that this kind of looks like it maybe fits to an area on the face. So one thing that I do in this case is, let me get my layer window here available, is I will go to that layer of that texture, and I'll just tone down the opacity so I can see through it, and then kind of see how I want this to fit. Now, the tool that we're going to use to get this to kind of wrap onto the face would be Edit, and I'm going to go to Transform and Warp. And from there, what I'm going to do is just pull all this down and kind of like line it up with the face. You can see I have these little handles that allow me to kind of adjust that a little bit better if I need to. I should move this one over as well. And what this does is just kind of like makes it maybe seem a little bit more realistic, and that's really the ultimate goal on here. So I'm going to grab these points on the edge, just move them in. That looks pretty good. And then I think on this one you either have to hit enter, and enter, and that'll apply the setting. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to bump this up, the opacity, back to 100. And just the idea here is that this kind of fits maybe a little bit better. It looks like it's maybe more rounded onto the face. And what I'm going to do next is go to Layer, and we've done this before, and Layer Mask. And instead of hitting Reveal All, I'm going to hit Hide All. So you can see that my Layer Mask now is black. So what I'm going to do is use my regular paintbrush, and I'm going to use white to expose this, basically to paint this on. Now my brush is really large, so I'm just using my brackets to bump that size down. You can just go up here and change your size as well up there. You do want a soft edge brush, but you also want your opacity on that brush to be low. So you have flow and opacity. And that opacity, I mean, you can go, I'm just going to try it around 40 and see what happens. And I don't want to go too large. And what my goal is to kind of have this just appear onto the face and look as realistic as possible. So I'm just kind of clicking and letting it go. I do have that soft edge brush to kind of allow it to blend out. And that looks pretty good. And then let's go ahead. I'm going to find just another one. So another texture. Do a beehive texture on this one. Some of them with the stamps on there, I try to avoid just because I don't want to work with that image. There are ways to get that off, but we're not going to do that today. So I'm just rescaling, just kind of zooming in and out. And what I'm going to do next, in this case, I'm not even going to warp this, even though I could. I'm not going to. I'm just going to actually have this kind of align a little bit differently on the face. I'm actually going to have it overlap an area, so like the tree bark area. And on this one, I'm just going to tone it down a little bit, make sure I like where it's at. Okay, it looks good. And then same thing, layer, double click to apply it, layer mask. We're going to say hide all. And then same deal, I'm going on and just kind of exposing this onto the face. Okay. Now, the reason I like to have these things that overlap is because that tends to make them look a little more realistic. So if you have two textures that are laying over one another. So I have 2. I'm going to stop there, but I'd like you to try to maybe get 3 to 5 to kind of build up on there. The next thing I'm going to do is actually talk about adjustment layers. And what an adjustment layer does is it affects the whole piece, specifically layers that are underneath an adjustment layer. So if I go up to layer, new adjustment layer, and let's try brightness and contrast. What this tends to do is kind of help your piece become a little bit more unified. So I'm just kind of toning down the brightness and popping the contrast a little bit on every layer. If I move this down and it was only between, it was only between 2, you can see how it's only affecting the face. In this case, it's affecting the textures also. It's kind of making those look similar. The nice thing about this is it allows your workflow to be really good. So if I don't like that, maybe I want to see what it looks like, I can easily delete this, and it's actually not been done to one of the pictures, one of the images I'm using. So I don't have to use it. I can just turn it off, or I can delete it. So let's go layer, new adjustment layer, new one. Let's try hue and saturation. All right, and it's going to pull it up in this editor again. And maybe I want this thing to be a little bit more like on the yellowish green side. So I'm going to go towards that. And then, I mean, again, you can mess with different saturation levels, lightness and darkness of the whole piece. Okay, that looks good. And you can see right here, here's my hue and saturation. Next one, I'm going to go up to layer, new adjustment layer, and gradient map. And a gradient map, what I'm going to do here is apply green and white across. So like a different green. Hit OK. And now you can see this is affecting the whole piece in quite a bit. So what I'm going to do next is actually tone this down a little bit. So it's maybe a little bit too intense. So you can see that you have this little white thing, that's your mask. Right now the mask is completely exposing the image. Like the green is, there. So I'm going to go and take black, just a low opacity black brush, and just kind of slightly airbrush this out. You can see how that kind of pops a little bit then. All right, and some things I like to do is go in and do that maybe 2 times. So I'll go in layer, new adjustment layer, gradient map, and try another color. So instead, let's go red. Or like magenta, and then maybe I'll airbrush this out too. So you can see what this is doing for the piece is kind of unifying it, making everything look kind of along the same colors. And you can expose and choose. You can go back and forth too. If you're like, oh, that was too much, I want a little bit more red tint in the hair, you can do that. So, so it's looking pretty good. One thing I was going to suggest for everybody is just to find another texture to put over the entire piece to help unify it. So for this, maybe like an aged paper texture would look good. Let's see how this one looks. That one's not real good, not loading. Drop it in. I just kind of pull it over the entire image. And then what I'm going to do is, on this one I might just test the opacity and see how that would affect the piece. That looks actually pretty good, but I think I want it to be a little bit more intensified. So what I'm going to do here is then just have that sit over top, and I'm going to go to layer, layer mask, and just do a reveal all so it stays. And go in and paint with my black and just kind of expose the original image. So I might want some of that texture and stuff from that new layer to stay, but not everything. And then you can see this one, it's looking good. Maybe I want it to be affected by a lot of those colors, so if I go down here and drop it underneath, some of these, you can see how that's maybe affecting it a little bit differently. Like the hue and saturation kind of mess with it a little bit. So, and you can turn on and off gradient maps and see how that's affecting the piece too. Your ultimate goal here is to really have this thing look as realistic as possible. So, and that's it.